young fisherman died at sea, and his captain has to live with the moment it happened. On February 25, 2026, tragedy struck the Bering Sea when 25-year-old Todd Meadows fell overboard from the FV Aleutian Lady, the vessel commanded by Rick Shelford. The loss stunned the tight-knit fishing community and quickly drew attention from fans of Deadliest Catch, where the dangers of the ocean are never far away. So what exactly happened in those 10 critical minutes on the freezing water? And why has the tragedy followed Captain Shelford long after the headlines disappeared? Join us as we uncover the story behind the moment that changed a captain's life forever. The day the ocean took someone. Todd Meadows was 25 years old and the newest member of the Aleutian Lady's crew. He had come aboard with the combination of physical capability and genuine enthusiasm that greenhorns bring before the Bering Sea teaches them what it actually costs. And in the time he had been out there, he had made an impression that went well beyond competence. He was a husband and had children at home waiting for him. And on the afternoon of February 25, 2026, while the Aleutian Lady was working the water 170 miles north of Dutch Harbor, he went overboard. The crew did not hesitate. Nobody on a working crab boat in those waters hesitates when someone goes over, because everyone on that deck understands the math. The Bering Sea in late February is not a place that gives people back. The water temperature does not negotiate. Every second of delay between a person going in and a crew getting to them is a second that the cold is using, and the cold does not stop using it. The crew of the Aleutian Lady recovered Todd Meadows from the water approximately 10 minutes after he went in. They worked on him the moment they got him on deck, using everything they knew. The Coast Guard received the call at 5:05 in the afternoon. Todd Meadows was transported to Dutch Harbor. He was pronounced dead. The Aleutian Lady was the last Deadliest Catch vessel still filming that season. Production concluded that day. The vessel that had been building a story across 4 seasons of national television, the boat that carried the name of a family whose connection to these waters ran back 100 years, came in from the Bering Sea, under circumstances that no one who had watched those 4 seasons had anticipated. Rick Shelford docked the boat, dealt with the Coast Guard, and then went home to Stanwood, Washington, and did not say anything publicly for 5 days. The news spread through the fishing community, and then beyond it, through the Deadliest Catch fan base, through anyone who had ever watched the show and understood that the danger on screen was not performed. Discovery Channel confirmed that Season 22 production had ended. The footage from before February 25th existed. What would happen with it was not yet determined. And Rick Shelford went home and did not say anything publicly for 5 days. When he finally wrote something, it was not a statement, but a portrait. He described Todd Meadows as someone who had become family quickly, whose work ethic had earned the respect of everyone on the boat almost immediately, whose smile was contagious, and whose laughter was the kind that traveled up from the deck to the wheelhouse and made the boat feel like a different place. He described a man who genuinely loved his children. He did not manage the language or create protective distance between himself and what had happened. He sat in the full weight of it and asked the people reading it to sit there with him. The Deadliest Catch community responded with an outpouring that reflected how seriously the show's audience understands what this work actually is. These are not television characters, and when someone dies out there, it is not a storyline. It is a real family somewhere with a hole in it that will not close. To understand why February 25th landed on Rick the way it did, You have to understand what he has built over the course of his life in these waters, and what it means to lose someone on a vessel that carries his family's name. The Aleutian Lady is not just a boat Rick Shelford captains. It is 100 years of family history on the water, passed down through generations, starting with a Norwegian boy who crossed an ocean at 12 years old. The weight of what happened on February 25th is the weight of all of that history, meeting the worst day of his career at the same moment. 5 generations deep. During season 21 of Deadliest Catch, Rick Shelford pulled the Aleutian Lady into the waters around Adak Island and told the cameras something that stopped the room. He looked at that island, a bleak and inhospitable stretch of rock at the far edge of the Alaskan wilderness that he described as resembling every horror movie he had ever seen, and then said quietly that his grandfather had come to that exact place at 12 years old. A Norwegian boy who had not yet become a man, who had crossed an ocean and landed in one of the most isolated and demanding places on the planet, and who had proceeded to help build the crab fishery in those waters from nothing. Rick stood there looking at the island where that boy had arrived over 100 years earlier and understood something about himself that most people never get to understand about the work they do. He was not fishing these waters. He was completing something that had started before his father was born. His grandfather, Soren Sorensen, became one of the early pioneers of Alaska's commercial crab industry. His father, Rick Sr., built on that foundation, founding Shelford Fisheries in 1995 and purchasing the Aleutian Lady the same year. When Rick Jr. joined the family operation in 1997 at 19, he came in at the bottom deliberately. He started as a greenhorn, last in every line, first for every miserable assignment, trusted with nothing until the crew decided he had earned it. He worked up through deckhand, went deeper into the vessel, and learned the engineering, the refrigeration systems, the hydraulics, the propulsion, until he understood the mechanical body of the boat well enough to keep it alive in conditions that had no tolerance for ignorance. He became fleet manager for Shelford Fisheries, overseeing the entire 4-vessel operation from the shore side, and then in 2019, he came back to the water full-time. Because men like Rick Shelford always come back to the water. He has a wife, Valeska, a son named Preston, 2 daughters, and a home in Stanwood, Washington. He goes home between seasons. The Bering Sea calls before the season is done, and he answers it. That is not a choice he makes. It is simply what happens. His personal website carries a line he wrote about the ocean that reads differently now than it did when he first put it there. The Bering Sea is relentless, he wrote, and at times it makes you feel like a blind man dancing on the edge of your grave. With plenty of mistakes made and plenty of lessons learned, you grow. He was talking about the craft of fishing when he wrote that, about the permanent danger that serious fishermen learn to work alongside rather than around. In 2026, it sounds like something he wrote about himself without fully knowing it. That is the man who walked onto the Deadliest Catch set for the first time in 2023. A fisherman carrying over 2 decades of experience and a century of family history on the same waters. The very first season the cameras followed him, before a single crab competition had played out, the Bering Sea handed him something that told the audience everything about who he was. Grief at sea. While the Aleutian Lady was working the Bering Sea during season 19, a phone call came in from Rick's father. His grandfather Soren, the man whose journey to Alaska at 12 years old had set in motion everything Rick had ever worked toward, was gone. Rick was several hundred miles from shore, with a camera crew capturing the exact moment the news hit him. There was no way to go home, no flight to catch, no way to be in the room where his family was gathering. He cried. He sat with it. And then he navigated the Aleutian Lady through Unimak Pass, one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the entire Alaskan fishery, because the quota was still waiting, and the crew was still depending on him. He carries what he carries. He does not stop. That moment, in his very first season on the show, established something important about who Rick Shelford is that all the crab competition footage in the world could not have produced. The audience watching at home saw a man receive the worst kind of news in the worst possible circumstances and make the same choice that every fisherman in his family had made before him. You grieve and you steer. That emotional template, absorbed through decades of working alongside men who understood that the Bering Sea does not pause for personal loss, is the thing that makes February 25th, 2026 so devastating to fully reckon with. He has been trained for a lifetime in these waters to absorb grief and keep moving. On February 25th, the grief was something no amount of that training could have fully prepared him for. The rest of Season 19 built out the portrait of who he was as a captain. He was the newest among veterans who had been fishing these waters for decades, and he approached that position the same way he had approached every situation where he was new, by doing the work until the work spoke for itself. Equipment problems required improvisation. Coast Guard compliance checks had to be passed before the boat could leave port. Storms pushed the timeline back. The quota did not care about any of it. He handled all of it with the patience of a man who had been on this boat since he was 19, who understood that the Bering Sea rewards preparation and punishes impatience, and who was fully aware that the veterans watching him were waiting to see whether he was the real thing or just a name on a vessel that had earned its reputation through other people's work. By the time Season 19 ended, nobody was still waiting. By Season 20, the patience had converted into something sharper. Rick Shelford had spent 2 seasons watching how the veteran captains operated and had learned exactly how to use what he knew. And what he did to Sig Hansen told viewers everything they needed to know about the captain he had become. Playing the game. Season 20 brought back the Red King crab fishery after years of closure, and every captain on the water knew that whoever found the right spots first would define the season. Rick Shelford had been watching the veterans operate for 2 years, studying their tendencies, understanding how they gathered and shared information, and he was willing to use what he knew in ways that a more cautious competitor would not. He had also developed something that 2 seasons of grinding against experienced competition gives a captain who is paying close enough attention, an understanding of exactly where his opponents were most vulnerable. He knew how Sig Hansen operated, he knew how Hansen thought about information, and he used that knowledge in a way that Hansen, for all his decades on the water, had not anticipated from the captain of the Aleutian Lady. The Jake Anderson episode from the same season showed the other side of how Rick operated. Anderson had boxed in the Aleutian Lady with strategically placed pots. Rather than escalating, Rick reached out directly, and the 2 captains ended up dividing the zone and running coordinated sets. It was the opposite of the Hansen confrontation in style, but identical in logic. Rick identified the most efficient path to the quota and took it, whether that path ran through a fight or a conversation. His willingness to adapt to what each situation actually required, rather than applying a single approach to every problem, is what made him genuinely dangerous out there rather than simply aggressive. By Season 21, Rick Shelford was not proving himself anymore. He was one of the captains. Full stop. The Aleutian Lady had established its identity on the show and built an audience that genuinely cared about where the season was going. The family legacy was playing out on national television in a way that would have meant something to his grandfather, who had come to those same waters at 12 with nothing and built something that had lasted 100 years. Everything that Season 21 represented, the continuity of it, the pride of it, the weight of bringing something real to a national audience made the silence that followed February 25th more total than it would have been for any other vessel. Not just a production shutting down. A 100-year story going quiet in the worst possible way. The headlines that followed the news chose to make it about punishment and endings. The real story is about something harder. What a captain carries when the ocean takes someone from his boat, and whether he goes back. What the headlines got wrong. Within days of the news breaking, the titles started appearing online. Sentenced to life. Goodbye forever. Written to make anyone who clicked assume that Rick Shelford had been arrested, charged, and removed from the world he had spent his life building. None of those things happened. Rick Shelford has not been arrested. He has not been charged with any crime. The United States Coast Guard conducted its standard investigation into the man overboard fatality, which documents the circumstances, determines the sequence of events, and establishes what happened. That investigation did not generate criminal proceedings against the captain. The framing in those headlines was invented, and it was invented specifically to exploit a man's public grief for clicks. The actual story underneath it is harder and more honest and more painful than a criminal charge would be, because a criminal charge has an end point. What Rick Shelford is carrying does not. Rick Shelford has been sentenced to what every captain is sentenced to when they lose someone on their watch. The memory of it. The questions that will never be fully answered. The permanent weight of knowing that a man who laughed loud enough to be heard from the wheelhouse is not there anymore. Season 22 of Deadliest Catch will air. The footage from before February 25th is there, and every frame of it will be watched differently because of what the audience will know when they watch it. They will see Todd Meadows on deck. They will see him working alongside the crew that came to think of him as a brother. They will hear his laugh, and they will watch all of it, knowing exactly how the season ends. That is the specific and extraordinary burden of what this show has always promised its audience. That this is real. That the people on those boats are not characters. That the danger is not performed. February 25th, 2026 kept that promise in the worst possible way, and Season 22 will have to carry that truth on screen. Rick Shelford will go back to sea. Not because the grief has passed, or because the questions have found answers, but because going back is simply what the man is. His grandfather came to those waters at 12 and built something out of nothing. His father built on it and passed the boat down. Rick started as a greenhorn on that same vessel, worked his way to captain, brought the family legacy to national television across 4 seasons, and is now carrying the heaviest thing a captain can carry while deciding what the next chapter looks like. He will carry Todd Meadows out there with him in the part of the job the cameras never reach. In the wheelhouse at 3 in the morning when the sea is doing what the Bering Sea does, and the crew is depending on the man who decided to keep going. That is the life. That is the real sentence. And that is the man serving it. What do you think happens next for Rick and the Aleutian Lady? And what should Season 22 look like out of respect for what this crew went through? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.